Welcome to a true spiritual adventure story like the world has never known with your host, Dr. James Yogati Weldon. Good day, this is Dr. Jim Weldon, Yogati, speaking to you from Heavenly Mountain in Boone, North Carolina. Our incredible community here, which is dedicated to bridging the gaps in our understanding between ourselves and the different traditions of the world. And also talking about living a divine life. This is my fourth novel in a series. The last one, the story behind the greatest story ever told, the hidden and unknown life of Jesus. What happened to him? 30 years old, he appeared back in his homeland and was already recognized by John the Baptist, who said, "This is one who will wipe away the sins of the world." And in this time, in this age, we are really repeating some of that. There really are incredibly great, wonderful beings in this world. And I talk about the 50 years worth of studying that I had with them in all cultures around the world. In my first two novels, Living the Enlightened Life, and the second one, The Rise of the First World Teacher. In this fourth novel is about the time of life of Jesus, which is recorded in the Bible, which really only represents maybe 2.5 years, maybe up to 3 years of his life. And I ask a very simple question: how could you possibly ever comprehend the full life of Jesus without knowing the true backstory, the full backstory of his life? Where did he come from? Where did he go? What really happened? We know now that what was recorded in the Bible was really put together and compiled 300 years later. And the writings attributed to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were not written by these individuals, according to the experts. And nothing was written, as far as we know, for maybe 75 years. That's a long time. Not denying that record, but attempting to correct the story behind the greatest story is the purpose of this work. And in this fourth novel, his life and ministry of 2.5 years and what happened to him after the ministry. You really can know, but it's a different way of knowing than we would ever suspect. You see, we are connected to the world and the universe. The divinity that's behind all that we see is everywhere, within us and without us. In a certain sense, like the internet, you don't know exactly how it works, but somehow through a technology, you're able to connect to that. You can type virtually anything on the keyboard and you can get some knowledge and information. You can see anywhere. You can really hear anywhere, audio. And what if that could be done in time and space? What if it was possible to access those events that happened? And in my case, many years back, I began to see in a very deep, profound state known as Turiya, superconsciousness, not waking, dreaming, and sleeping, far above that, the events of his life, as if I was walking through a 3D movie and the feelings and thoughts that he was passing through. And after a couple of days, as I've told again, I said, I better start writing this down. So I started recording it. And after I got through a lot of his life, essentially what happened to him from the time of 12 or 13 up until 30 years, 32, 33 years of his life, that is the last book, The Story Behind the Greatest Story. And I talk about it as memories from the life of Jesus because that's how they are experienced for me. You know, honestly, even though I'm putting this out, I'm making no claims whatsoever. This is just exactly what I experienced, how I experienced it. But if you're curious about how such things are possible, and really want to validate and know the truth. And that's what we're all seeking, is truth and an endless love in our life. I encourage you to consider looking at my first two novels, because that unknowingly is a validation of the many years of training that I went through personally in order to be able to share this with you. So in this episode, he's returned home. He's been greeted by his family. He's met John the Baptist, an intuitive, a saint, a holy man, and is baptized in the great power and grace of the divine, entered into Jesus and became christened. He joined with the Father, and his capability as a spiritual being accelerated completely, so much so that he needed to go into the desert for a while to become accustomed to this much higher state of awareness. John the Baptist also proclaimed that this individual helped wipe away the sins of the world. And believe it or not, there are others who have received that same endowment in our time. I'll talk about that in my next novel. And so now he's beginning his ministry. And he begins his ministry with collecting some of his really old friends and devotees. You know, our life is so much bigger than we could ever imagine. Even this world that seems so huge behind me is just a speck of dust in the cosmic space. What do we know about those realms of life? Almost nothing. So we all need to accept the fact that there's a lot that we do not know. I know from my own experience that our life is much longer and bigger than we imagine. As a little child in my first novel, I had flashbacks, memories really of an earlier life and what happened during that life, nightmares that I had as a child. I was terrorized by that. So go back and review that first book if you want to hear about those stories. So life is much bigger. But why would we not remember? If our life is so much bigger, why do we not remember? You know, the past is a lesser developed and evolved state for every one of us. In the past, we have been lesser than we are now. And I assure you, we have made all the mistakes that we could possibly make, been through sometimes horrendous and sometimes wonderful and enrapturing events. But if we remembered all of that and all of the relations and details, it would make it impossible to live this life as a free individual moving forward. And so we forget that. It fades. But what we do remember is the feelings. So sometimes you're attracted to certain things, individuals, repelled by other individuals. The emotions from the past we do experience to a lesser degree, not as full as we experienced at the time, but the feelings are there. Now, Jesus, now connected with the divinity of life, now begin to have access to that kind of deeper information. This is how he met his first disciples, Philip and Andrew and Simon, Peter, all from Bethesda in Galilee. He knew them. My teachers many times have told me, well, I know those that I'm connected with. He could remember. Jesus could remember those relationships in the past. And it's obvious that he would bring those in as his students, even though those individuals did not. Now, this kind of seeing and knowing, this kind of intuitive seeing, for us can be accurate or not accurate. It can be 5% accurate and 95% inaccurate, because at a certain point, anything that we entertain in our mind, we can see and experience, but it doesn't mean it is true. My struggle for many years was trying to validate what was true and not true about all of this. And so at a certain point, I was told it's valid, it's acceptable. What you see is true. And it's shown itself over and over again. And so he came together with these disciples and began to share some of his knowledge, some of his insights. He was a healer and an individual that did good when he could, taking care of the poor and sick. He had learned this from his education in India, which I talk about in the third novel, how he went through that training and traveled all around that region. Remember, there is no Christianity in the world. And the wisdom of the East was spread all throughout that region, very close to the land where present Israel is. And there were wise men and individuals that traveled by camel that came in to visit this community, to travel along the caravan route from India, and also the water route as well, ships. That's how we got to India in the first place. The three wise men told him to do that, to go. So he returns from the north to Galilee with these disciples. And there, the first miracle that I talked a little bit about earlier occurs in Cana, when the water changes into wine. I can tell you, nobody was more surprised than Jesus. He had this intuitive insight, but it isn't like he went, make the change, and kind of intended it for it to happen. True miracles are not like that. They're literally a happening. In a specific time and place, there's a divine need to inspire people, perhaps the individual who is seeking a healing, his faith draws that force and love from the divine, and it takes place. But after that wedding, which surprised many individuals, rumors began to go out. And then he continued on to Capernaum on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee with his mother, brothers, and disciples, and stays there for a little while. And it is here that really the early ministry occurs, in Judea and Samaria and Galilee. And so he travels south to Jerusalem for the Passover, the first one mentioned in the Gospels. And there he has an encounter, a reaction to the money changers in the temple for the first time. And then he meets there also the Pharisee Nicodemus. So he was disturbed, obviously, to see so much commercial activity going on in the temple of God. And in his wrath and anger at seeing this, he continues to travel after that event, and he leaves for the countryside, where he baptizes for the first time, and his disciples baptize a small gathering of individuals. Now it would be worthwhile to talk a little bit about baptism. It was something that John the Baptist had been doing, obviously. So it was accepted amongst his followers, which were many more than those following Jesus, even in his lifetime. But it's symbolic of entering into the purity and the water of life, the spirit of life. This hard, dense world, this physical world around us, is only the first realm of existence. There are different higher levels and planes of existence above this one, a number of them. We know that our eyes can only see in a certain wavelength. Our ears can only hear in a certain vibratory pattern. And there's a lot of things going on in higher frequency realms through the phone system, through satellite is an example of one of those. We've extended our hearing, if you will. And so the next higher realm, I talk about this in my second novel, is one akin to the element of water. The life force flows down and through our body. We have our gross physical physiology, and we also have our subtle physiology. We have an energetic physiology. The Chinese work with that through their acupuncture system, and many of the healers attempt to raise their life force, their energy, in order to be able to heal more effectively. And I spent a number of years, close to 30 years, as a physician in that field, in the field of holistic healthcare and natural healthcare. And I saw many amazing healings occur during that time. Entering into the water is symbolic of entering into this field of the life force, the energy. In the East, they talk of that as the prana, the life force. And literally, if we were able to move back into that space, we could begin to experience it. And I do have on my app, which is available on iPhone and Android, in the Great World Wisdom app, Great World Wisdom, and then greatworldwisdom.com, an example of these experience. I do some guided meditations so people can begin to move into this space and begin to experience what it is. So if you were to do a meditation there, and there are some, close your eyes. And as you go deeper within yourself, you would begin to realize that this body is only a space where your awareness and consciousness is, and that your energetic field is beyond that, and the different mental fields and the field of the life force is much bigger. And literally, suffering is when that energy field is smaller than your physical body, when you start to shrink your life force, moving downwards. And shrinking is really a definition of suffering. It occurs because of that. These individuals would make a commitment to a new life in the spirit. Jesus wanted them to let go of the trials and tribulations that they had been through, the difficult, terrible times that many of them had been living. And in his presence, they could begin to experience this. And his early disciples had been blessed, if you will, by him to enable this. It's not that they could do it in a certain sense. It happened around them and with them through his grace, if you will. And so when they entered the water, it washed away the sins, some of the sins, and when they came back out, they were renewed. Not completely, but some healings begin to occur. And again, these healings were not something that anybody was trying to do. Real healing is not done on that level of intent, because the truth is there's healing going on every second, every moment in your body. You don't maintain the trillions of cells in your body. You don't heal the scars. You don't even get rid of your deep stress when you sleep at night. The silence of the restful state does that. And literally every single one of us, knowing or unknowing, return to that divine state in an unconscious awareness during deep sleep at night. Sleep without awareness, not dreaming, but beyond that. And so one of the first heightened states of awareness that does occur, there is a progression in the growth and development of your awareness. You begin to have awareness, consciousness throughout the night, all the time. So gradually you begin to become aware that that part of you, which is always awake, not your small mind, the bigger cosmic aspect of you that begins to merge into the divine reality, is always there. And so through the different practices that you can do, and there are practices that need to be done that can tremendously accelerate this process. Jesus would have been the first person to say this. That's what all of these years of training had been for him in the East, to begin to and allow this force to move through him. And obviously he was exceedingly blessed, because this divine force, which is he began to understand, was passing through his enlightened masters. And he did have masters. He did have spiritual teachers that guided him, began to move through him when he was christened. He was here for a specific task. That is to relieve the suffering that was going on. Truly, as it's been talked about, to take on the sins of others. People, some high beings literally can do that. And if that happens, that means that the weight that we're carrying is lightened. And so he was just beginning this ministry with his disciples, and he began to teach. And although we have no written records of any of his speeches, we are more fortunate in these days that those great beings that are now living in this world, and there are many of them that have come for this special time to awaken the world to the next potentiality of mankind, are here. And so the story of Jesus is connected with that and what is happening now in the world. And so the story continues as the first blessings and baptisms occurred, and he began to do what he could do to begin to help the individuals with everyday life. He wasn't just a preacher of knowledge. He did good works. And there's a story of him meeting the Samaritan woman at the well, and many individuals in that region come to him. And then he continues on to Galilee. And he begins to do the laying on of hands as well. The healing through laying on of hands. And that has been a discipline that I've studied actually for many years in my life, used it in my healthcare practice, and taught doctors and nurses to do that in hospitals at one point. And there are some benefits that definitely can come from that. It is quite real. In the sense, the healing, our smallness just needs to get out of the way and allow it to happen. And to whatever degree that you could say we are charged with that life force, then a benefit does come with that. It's quite real. And he returns home again to Nazareth. And there he preaches in the synagogue for the first time and is rejected. So I'll talk more about this in the next episode. The main points of this part of the story is that he knew those that were his friends and disciples, close helpers in the past. And he went out to meet them and inspire them. And then he began to share a very simple teaching. The kingdom of heaven is within you. We are all children of the divine existence. And our work is to help serve each other with love and devotion as best we can. So join me again in the next adventure story, the story behind the greatest story ever told.